Well, good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed that lunch. It seemed a bit hurried. Well, good. Good. Good pizza and salad, and I liked that little dessert, didn't you? Well, it's time for our, quote, medical presentation, which we do at every SOAR. The topic, as you can see on the wall, is ADHD in adults. This topic came off of the evaluation forms last year from one of you, and there were some other suggestions as well, but the committee discussed them all and took a couple of votes and decided that we seem to hear a lot about ADHD, so why don't we go with this and hope that a lot of you will be interested as well. The speaker today is Mr. Robert Hayes, who has firsthand and personal knowledge and experience of ADHD. He also has relevant education and experience in the medical field. He is employed by Centura Health Systems as the Injury Prevention Program Manager. He leads the system's Injury Prevention and Trauma Survivors Network programs. He focuses on leading causes of injuries in Colorado and works with community partners, governments, faith communities, and not-for-profits to implement evidence-based programs and initiatives. Robert has numerous academic degrees. He has a Bachelor's of Arts, BA in Sociology from Clemson University. He has an Associate's of Health Science in Nursing from Greenville Technical College. He has a bachelor's in nursing from Arizona State, and even a master's in pastoral theology from St. Joseph's College of Maine. So, well qualified. But another thing that you should know about Robert is that he is the person at Centura Health that SOAR has been going to twice a year to find this medical speaker for our seminars. He has helped us year after year, over and over again, for years now. And finally, we get to hear him in person. But we are doubly grateful. So SOAR thanks you over and over. Thanks, Robert. Would you help welcome Robert Hayes?
Thank you. That was very kind. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yep. So I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for inviting us. I always enjoy working with all of you. We've had different speakers that have been here. I hope they've been good. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. We're a large health system, and one of the things that you probably see on the screen is something that's a little different. St. Anthony Hospital is where my office is, and we recently changed to Common Spirit. And so Centura Health is no longer in existence. It used to be a combination between Catholic Health and Advent Health. And they parted ways a couple of months ago, and so we're now Common Spirit. And so we are a division of that group, and we include Kansas, Colorado, and Utah. And I get to go to those great places and visit with them and work with them on their injury prevention programs. And so really happy to be here today and talk to you about ADHD. And I'm going to be talking to you from my experience, as well as working with folks in the community and my background working in ADHD. So just a little disclaimer, this is for information only. I don't want you to leave today and go, I have ADHD. That's for your healthcare provider to work with you and diagnose, not me as a speaker today. I'm going to share with you a lot of information in the world of behavioral health and mental health especially around ADHD. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we'll be talking about that in detail. So don't take what I say today as what's going to be for the rest of our lives, because it's going to change as they continue to do a lot of research. I'm going to be sharing my personal experiences and those kind of things today. And while it's my experiences, it may not be others that have ADHD's experience, right? It's all a little different, and it'll make sense as we get through this. And so just remember that as we're going through it. If I say something, it's from a personal perspective. It's how I respond to ADHD, not necessarily how everyone else will. And then I just encourage you to do a lot of research and information if you're interested in learning more about ADHD. There's some really good articles, books out there on the topic. And so just a little bit about me. I grew up in South Carolina in a 2-parent household, graduated from high school in 1994, and then I have completed 4 different college degrees, all with honors. And then I've been a registered nurse for a little over 18 years. I've managed community health programs in South Carolina and here in Colorado. I've been married for 25 years, and I have ADHD. And I don't share that because I'm like boasting, right? Something I've had to work really hard to accomplish. But the reason why I share it is there's a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes out there around ADHD. And so things that I've heard over the years, just a variety of things, that it isn't real. It's made up. It's an excuse so that you don't have to be accountable. I've heard that. Recently, I had a nurse tell me, well, everyone has a little bit of ADHD. And I was like, no, not true. People with ADHD, I've heard, oh, they're lazy, or they're not disciplined, or they're not successful. They want stimulants, and we'll talk about that in detail. Had difficult childhoods. I had a very normal 2-parent household, middle-class family, grew up. Are always late. I was 30 minutes early this morning. My philosophy is if you are early, you're on time. If you're on time, you are late. And so that's how I have to do things, and that they're not reliable. And so those are stereotypes, and I'm going to talk about where those kind of come from and what those mean as we go through the presentation. So what is ADHD? There's 3 common neurodevelopment disorder characteristics. The first one is inattention. So not being able to focus is what primarily is around that one. Impulsivity, will do things without thinking it through. And then hyperactivity, being fidgety, doing those kind of things. Hyperactive, can't be still, talks a lot, that's me. And there's 3 main types. You can be predominantly have the inattentive presentation, so hard to focus, hard to stay on track on projects. You may not necessarily have the impulsivity and the hyperactivity. And so a lot of those people, sometimes people will say they're withdrawn, or they're just not really into doing things, and maybe not able to focus and just don't get a lot of things. They may start projects and never finish them, is a perfect example. Then the second one is the hyperactive, impulsive presentation. That's the folks that are always talking, interrupting, starting new projects but probably doesn't finish them, those kind of things. And then there's a combined presentation. Guess which one I have? The combined. And so a little bit about me before we even really get started. As a child growing up, my mother always told me, she's like, you need to be still. There was about 4 common phrases I used to hear a lot. You need to pay attention. I heard it frequently. You need to pay attention. You need to pay attention. Why are you not paying attention? You're not paying attention. You need to be still. Stop talking. Those kind of things, you know. And I would be like, I'm focused, I'm paying attention, you know. I remember in 3rd grade, my best friend Stevie was, his nickname was Scooter. And Scooter and I were best friends, and I just wanted to talk to Scooter and hang out with Scooter. School was, at that point, I just wasn't really engaged in it, so I didn't have a huge focus on it, right? It wasn't something that stimulated me, and we'll talk about why that is as we get through this. And so my 3rd grade year, I stared at a wall because I couldn't pay attention in class. I made great grades, but it was not engaging to me, and I didn't get a reward from the teacher and the presentations that were happening. And so we'll talk about that in detail as we go through. And so I just remember as a kid, frequently being told that, like, oh, you just need to calm down, Robert, quit talking, be still, And then I got through high school and started college, and my first semester was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I couldn't focus. I didn't have parental oversight, so I was able to do what I wanted to do, and I went to Clemson University, which was, that year was, I think it received the title as the most partied school in the country, and of course, I am there. And so, and my impulsivity and my hyperactivity was on full display. And I had a lot of fun, and I wasn't focusing on school, and my grades were kind of slipping, and my mom and dad had a conversation with me, and I went to the doctor, and he said, "Do you think you have ADHD?" And I said, "Oh, no, that's what kids have." And he, I'm in college, I'm not a kid anymore. And he's like, "Well, that's not necessarily true." And we started having a conversation, and I was a little resistant to it. The stigma that's around behavioral and mental health disorders was much more prevalent then than they are now. And so I was a little bit more hesitant to even engage and have conversations. But there was a great therapist that was on campus that worked with me and really helped me be successful. And then on through life, I've learned way more about ADHD and those kind of things. So let's talk about what it is. Like, what is it? And so it's all in our head. It's in our brain. And so we have chemicals and electrical impulses that are in our brains, right? So we have neurons, which are our cells that are there, our nerve cells. And then we have neurotransmitters, which are, they're messengers. So think about it as it's the thing that carries the chemicals, right? It's what moves messages between the cells. And so the three big ones that we look at are dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And the three of those, for somebody that has ADHD, they don't have as much as somebody that doesn't have ADHD. So that's what is the most current research. So dopamine, if you've ever been to the gym or exercised, or you got a really like nice surprise, like a brand new car, or somebody gave you a really nice gift and you get really excited and you're like, whoa, and you feel really euphoric. That's a rush of dopamine that's being released. And so that's the pleasure response, right? That's an attention response. Norepinephrine is the flight or fight. So I think about horses. That's what they do. They'll stay alert. They'll watch something, and they have to make the decision: am I going to stand my ground and fight, or I'm gonna fight? I'm gonna run away. And so that's what norepinephrine does. That's around our alertness and our attention. And then serotonin, I call it our happy neurotransmitter. It is about happiness and calmness and optimism. So if you don't have the messengers to carry the chemicals between the cells, then the messaging is not given, right? And so that's why you see people that are inattentive, because they don't have dopamine and norepinephrine. They may be fidgety because serotonin is low, right? And so the other part that really goes with this, and all of this is pretty much in the frontal lobe of our brain, is the reward system, right? And so for people with ADHD, I called it, it's almost like a filter. And a normal filter, let's say, is an inch thick, right? For a person with ADHD, that filter's like a foot thick. So for messages to get through, it takes a little bit longer, it might be a little bit harder. That's also including with rewards. And I'm going to be very honest and authentic today. So I'll give an example. At work, when I work on a project, I take on a huge project, and I'm very excited about it, and it happens, and it's been very successful. And then my vice president says, at a meeting in front of everybody, "Robert, thank you for putting it together. It was really good." And ends it. I'm like, well, that's it? and then I don't want to do it again, right? Because the reward is not there for me. And they know it, so, they give me a hard time about it. They're like, we got to cheerlead a little bit for Robert today so he feels good. And so they know. And so, everybody has their own things, but it is part of that. So with children, especially with ADHD, the reward system is very important. And so you think about rewards too. When you start a new project, let's say you're going to redo your bathroom. And so you start this project and you're all excited in the beginning, right? But then the real work starts happening, right? And it gets frustrating, and then you're like, oh man, I got to go to Home Depot for like the 5th time. For us with ADHD, a lot of us, the reward is no longer there, right? It kind of goes down, and then we kind of get disinterested in it. We don't really focus on it anymore. We kind of like, I don't want to work on it anymore. And so that can happen. So that's what you see with the chemicals. And so as we go through today, I'll talk about these neurotransmitters a little bit more and share with you what those mean. But there's other possible causes and risk factors that are related to ADHD. The first one is genetics. My middle sister has ADHD. We talk about it frequently. We're very similar in how our ADHD affects us. Matter of fact, my mother says that, we're so much alike, we could have been twins, but we're 14 years difference. And so brain injury is another one. When I was 2.5 years old, I was hit by a car, had a pretty severe head injury, broke both of my legs and was hospitalized for a long period of time. So I don't know, I don't have any residuals from the brain injury now, but, when I was little, 2.5 years old, I didn't speak for a while, and I also didn't walk for a while, but all that has changed. Exposures to hazards during pregnancy or at young age, substance use such as alcohol and tobacco, that wasn't part of our family, and I was normal weight and right on time. So those things aren't there. But what are not risk factors and causes, but can cause ADHD to be worse, it can contribute to it, is things like sugar, watching TV or video games and those kind of things. Any kind of family discord. And you think about it from that perspective, right? It's already hard for you to concentrate. You might be a little impulsive. There's behavioral issues going on. And if those things are contributing to it, it can worsen the symptoms, right? And so while sugar and watching TV and family discord can make it worse, it's not what causes it. And so one of the important things that I want to share is ADHD research is ongoing, and it's a topic that people are really looking at. And the exact cause and risk factors are really still not clear or fully understood. So we go back to the misconceptions and stereotypes when we say it's not real. I think this is where some of that's rooted, right? Because we don't know the exact cause, right? So when you think about heart disease, a heart attack, you have a clogged artery in your heart, you have a heart attack, right? It's pretty straightforward. A stroke in your brain, it's either a clot, or it could be that one of your vessels ruptured. We know exactly what causes those things. ADHD, we don't. And so it kind of creates some suspicion around some folks if they don't have a concrete and objective way of understanding it. So the American Psychiatric Society's DSM-5, it's how they categorize all mental and behavioral health disorders and how they're diagnosed and what they are, says that basically both of the inattention and hyperactive forms of ADHD, if you are 16 or younger, you need to have 6 or more symptoms. If you're 17 or older, it's 5 or more symptoms. And they need to be over a 6-month period and shown in 2 different situations. And so interfering with like different aspects of work, life, home, those kind of things with friends. And so the reason why that they have it this way and they want it to be a 6-month period, because we think about, different times in our lives when you don't have ADHD or any other thing, but you may have a difficult time, hard to concentrate or what have you, or what have you. So we want to make sure, that we truly are looking at it from the most objective perspective. And so for me, when I was diagnosed, a family doctor told me pretty much that I had it. And then I did not go to a psychiatrist for my diagnosis. I'd never been to a psychiatrist. I'd been to a therapist, but I'd never been to a psychiatrist until I moved to Colorado. And so it was a new experience for me, and I went in and we went through this, and he verified everything, and I left that day because I was hoping he was going to say it wasn't this and it was something else and it was easy to fix. And that was only 8 years ago. But so that's kind of how the DSM-5 recommends for diagnostics of around ADHD. Now, the thing that we really have to also look at is other traits and characteristics that come along with ADHD. To hyperfocus. I am like a genius at that. Like I can look at something and say, I'm going to hyperfocus on this project today, and I can work on it for 5 hours without getting up, without moving from my seat, and get it done, right? And I don't even have a clue sometimes what's going on around me. Sometimes I'll say, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to work on this until I leave at 4:30. I will look up at 6:30 and be like, oh, wow, it's 6:30. And typically, it happens more in the winter where I recognize that because the sun's going down, it's getting dark, and I'm like, I probably should be home by now. And then I look over and I realize that I have hyper-focused on something for about 4 hours. And so that's a perfect example in this picture. Hyperfocusing can be utilized in a very positive way, but it also can be contribute to very negative situations as well. I'll give an example. It's Friday at 4 o'clock. My vice president sends me an email. Hi, Robert, on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, please give me a call. I want to discuss something with you. Have a great weekend. Thanks. Oh. I can't. I'm going to call her. I'm just going to call. Or I'm going to text her and be like, nope. Because what's going to happen to me is I'm going to hyper-focus on that email over the weekend. And I'm going to go negative, and I'm going to think, I have done something wrong. What have I done? What have I forgotten to do? What did I say? What did I do? And then the entire weekend, I'm exhausted because I've hyper-focused on something that's not even real. Like I don't even know what it is yet, but because of that triggering, it's there. So hyper-focusing, to be hyper-focused it can be a very positive experience for a person. It can be a very negative experience. Being resilient. So that's one thing that, bouncing back and figuring out. I'll tell you, and it's really a big difference between people that are treated and untreated. So if somebody's been diagnosed and they're untreated, a lot of times it's really hard for them to have these things, to bounce back. But when you're treated and you've had therapy and you have these tools in your little toolkit, being resilient and bouncing back is a thing that you learn you have to do. For me, for my ADHD, I can't remember birthdays, dates. It's really hard. I had to think about when I graduated from high school. Things like that, it just doesn't stay in my brain. And also names. I have worked with some people for 12 years. I'm introducing them in front of a group. My ADHD kicks in. I can't even say their name. I can't even think what it is. It happens, right? And so sometimes you have to be resilient. You have to bounce back because people get disappointed. You're like, hey, my birthday was Saturday. And I'm like, it was, wasn't it? And I'm like, I am so sorry. You have to bounce back. You have to figure out how you can work through things that have been challenging. Being very creative. So for ADHDers, to be able to get that reward system that we talk about so that the dopamine and the norepinephrine and the serotonin is really working to the fullest extent for what little bit we do have, being creative and creativity really helps energize our brain and gets us going, right? Communication. For somebody that has ADHD that is hyperactive, impulsive, we tend to talk a lot. And I catch myself especially if it's somebody new and I'm introducing myself to them at work and I'm sharing what I do. I'll leave from there and I'm exhausted because I have just talked so much. And then I think, I don't know anything about them because I never shut up. I just kept talking and talking. I did it yesterday, actually. And you get very excited. You'll see sometimes people with ADHD that will cut people off. They'll be telling a story and they'll be like, because it's in our brain right now. And it's the thing that's in my brain right now. And I got to get it out because if I don't, it's going to go away. And so for communicating, so somebody's like, oh, yeah, we were at this wedding Tuesday. Oh, I went to one on Sunday, or whatever, whatever it may be. And so interrupting is a kind of a common theme. Courage. So one of the things with ADHD is with the impulsivity is we will take risks sometimes because we don't think it through. So we're that group, it's in college, I'm not saying I did this, that, that doesn't look like that's too far down of a ravine, we can probably jump, and then, in the hospital later that day because you've sprained your ankle. So courage to do things. A lot of times at work, there'll be some really cool project that's coming about, and I'll be like, oh, I want to do it. Like, this is really exciting to me. And so I'll take it on. And being caring and compassionate, because we know we've gone through so much and it's been challenging, we recognize that it's important because we appreciate when people are caring and compassionate to us and have that little bit of grace for us when we do mess up and forget a birthday or whatever it may be, that we want to return that caring and compassionate presence as well. So with ADHD treatment, and this is where there is a hot topic part of it. What you want to do is you want to minimize the impact of the symptoms while you maximize their ability to cope and to compensate. And so it can be done by a variety of different ways. And one of those is with behavioral strategies, with cognitive and behavioral or psychotherapy. And so I had a lot of that when I was in college. I've had some of it in 2020 and 2021 as well. And so what they helped me do was learn how to plan, organize, and to time manage. And so people at work will tell you that I'm the most organized person that they work with a lot of times. And all I could think was, you have no clue. I have to have a calendar. I have my list and I have my Post-it notes. I have gone into people's offices, and if you'll see it, you'll see the Post-it notes, and it's like a field of Post-it notes. And sometimes I'm like, you got ADHD? And they're like, yep. Because that's one of the things they teach us. You use Post-it notes and put it around us. Because one of the key things for people with ADHD is if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And that is a problem for me. So if I buy something and I put it in a drawer and I don't look at it for 6 months and I'm back in the store, I will forget I have it. I'll buy it again. And then guess what I'll do again? I'll buy it again. And so I'll do those kind of things. So I've learned even in my home how I have to categorize things, label things, have things where I know they are, and I can't mix a lot of stuff together. I can't have a lot of chaos. If you take a lot of stuff out, like if you're going to reorganize your bedroom and you take everything out of the room and you kind of mix everything up and then you're going to put it back, I'm not that person to help you because we'll never get it done because I'll just stare at it. Because I can't do clutter. And so if I'm in a situation where there's a lot of clutter, I can't do it because I have to be very organized and have it all planned out. And so my calendar at work is what really tells me what I'm doing. And I've created a routine around that. So I know when I walk into my office at 8 a.m., I turn on my computer, I do these things, and the first thing I do before I talk to anybody is I look at that calendar because it's going to tell me exactly what I'm doing that day so that I show up and I can get prepared that morning. The other part of it is pharmacology. And this is probably where there's a little bit more of a hot topic, it's a little bit more controversial around stimulants and non-stimulants. I can tell you I don't like stimulants. They don't really work well for me. I don't like the rush that they give me. So what a stimulant does is because you need that norepinephrine, you need the serotonin, you need the dopamine, right? And so it helps keep those chemicals, those neurotransmitters from being uptake, a process of removing them from your system. So what they do is it keeps them there. So you have a more of a supply of them, even though that they're in low supply compared to somebody that doesn't have ADHD. And so somebody that takes stimulants that has ADHD, have you ever heard of the concept of like if they take too much that it makes them drowsy? And that happens to me. So if I have too much of a stimulant, which you would think would make me very hyperactive and make me very fidgety and impulsive, actually relaxes me and makes me calm because it helps keep the serotonin and the dopamine and the norepinephrine in my brain where it needs to be so it can transmit those signals. And so because of the the calming effect of serotonin, it probably calms me more than it does anything. So I'm relaxed. And so if one of the key ways I know if I'm on too much of a stimulant is if I go to work and I'm sleepy. I'm like, this has to be changed. For other people, stimulants may keep them up at night, and so then during the day they're very tired. There is also non-stimulants that people can take, and so I'm on one of those. I actually take Wellbutrin, which is it's a very old drug that's used for, it's an antidepressant. But Wellbutrin, it helps with the reuptake of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And so I take a very low dose stimulant. So I take about a third of what most people take when it comes to the stimulant that I'm on. And then I take Wellbutrin, and that is what has worked for me. Now, it has to be adjusted at different times and at different situations. And one of the things when I talk to people with ADHD is self-awareness. When you can start to sense when things are bad or when they're good, right? And so you start missing things, or you feel like you're a little bit out of control, or things are just not where you need to be. I make an appointment with a doctor, and I go in, and my doctor, my primary care doctor, also has ADHD. And so when I first talked to him about it, when I moved here, I was like, so I got this thing, and he's like, well, okay, that's no big deal, I do too. And I was like, okay, well, good, now I feel better about this now. And so, because I didn't, the stigma that's associated with that sometimes can be scary to tell people. So I've tried numerous different combinations, and for people, some people don't need stimulants. There is research that shows that sometimes stimulants are overprescribed. Years ago, when a kid would start to have symptoms of ADHD, it was just the first line medication was to give them a stimulant, typically Ritalin. And a lot of physicians have really pushed back from that now. And that's not the number one thing that they want to do. They want to put the therapy in with it and look at other medications that can be used. There's actually some blood pressure medications that work really well as well, too. So one of the things for me is, depending on what's going on in life and those kind of things, sometimes the medications just have to be adjusted. And so it is, what it is. But everybody, not everybody needs the same drug combination. One of the things that, they've investigated and they've researched is really the need for stimulants. So in war times, in combat, they actually used to give Ritalin to the military, to the soldiers, because it hyper-focused them. It helped them focus on what they were doing, and so especially some of the folks that were in some intense situations. So, a stimulant can be used if you don't have ADHD and can help with focus and with help with things, but it's not necessary for every person to have it. So there's some trends that we see. Males have a higher prevalence of ADHD than females. 1/3 of children diagnosed with ADHD continue to have an ADHD diagnosis as an adult. I personally feel I probably had ADHD as a child and just was never diagnosed, right? And so I've had ADHD my whole life, and I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. That get diagnosed as an adult, they probably had it as a child. And I think that some children that have had a diagnosis of ADHD as a child may not have had ADHD, and then as an adult, they no longer have it. Things change as we grow up and our brain develops. But also, children, as they develop, their brain develops and things, coping mechanisms and those kind of things and strategies become much more fine-tuned. And so they may not fall into the category necessarily of 5 symptoms over a 6-month period in 2 different situations, so they would not have a diagnosis anymore, even though they have had ADHD. And so the big thing with ADHD is relationships. And I'm talking about all relationships, not just your relationship you have with your spouse, but also with your coworkers, with your your faith community, with your your family and those kind of things. And so if you recall, being inattentive, being impulsive, and being hyperactive is not characteristics that people really embrace when they're looking for a relationship, right? So forgetting things that are important like birthdays, doesn't pay attention to a situation. One of the things that happens with me is I don't pick up on the subtle cues of something my spouse is trying to communicate to me sometimes, and I'm like, you just got to tell me, because I'm not picking it up. That we don't listen, or that we don't stop talking. And so one of the things that being self-aware of your symptoms, I love to talk and share stories and talk to people all day, right? And then when somebody starts talking to me, if it doesn't grab my attention, I'll float away. And I catch myself. And so being self-aware of that, then I purposely make sure that I listen to what people are saying to me. And I have certain questions in my brain that keeps me on track. So I'm like, what are they talking about? Yep. And I keep myself going. And that's how I stay focused. Because I don't know if you've ever talked to somebody with ADHD and you're talking to them, you tell them something and they just float away, right? They're not catching on to what you're saying, or they're fidgeting and it doesn't appear that they're paying attention. Chaos and clutter. So I don't thrive really well in those arenas, like clutter and chaos and those kind of things. But some people with ADHD creates that as well, right? And so because of the situations and the things that are going on in their lives, we can be very, very passionate and emotionally driven. So a perfect example is last week I was in Ireland. We went to a cathedral in Dublin, and they had a group there that was singing. And so I've had a lot of loss in my family over the last 6 months. Both my mom and dad have died, and so has my mother-in-law. And so just in this year. And so we're sitting there and they were singing this really pretty song, and it just got me very emotional. And I had to actually get up and walk away, because it was a very sensitive thing for me. We can be very emotionally driven because it's something that's exciting to us. So I use a perfect example of that would be taking me to a theme park. It's a great idea and it's a bad idea. And I'll tell you why. You go to a theme park and there's a lot of stimulation, right? There's characters walking around, there's smells, there's sights, there's lights, there's all this stuff, right? It's very entertaining. But what happens at a theme park? You get in line to ride a ride and you see the sign that says, from this point, it's 40 minutes. And for me, with my hyperactivity and trying to stand still and stay in line for 40 minutes is extremely hard. And so I get frustrated. It's not that I don't think that I should be standing in line or that I'm privileged and should go to the front. It's just that in that moment, in that space, it's really hard for me to adapt. So if I'm with people that were talking and they let me talk, I'm usually okay. But get very frustrated, and then you get on the ride, and it's very rewarding, right? And you come off that ride and that dopamine rush, and you're like, whoa, that was awesome. You forget all about standing in line. But then what happens is you go get another line, and then it's the same old thing over and over for me. So get very emotionally driven. I'll walk up, and if I see a very long line, I'm not doing it. I'd rather just go do something else and let everybody else go stand in line. I can't do it. I just can't do it. So the relationship dynamics really are often the same. So a person with ADHD may feel very overwhelmed or shamed. They may feel like they're a failure, or which results in maybe feeling a little unwanted or unloved, right? Because you messed up. You forgot that birthday. You forgot to pay the bills. You forgot to do this. You didn't do this on time. Your spouse you feel like you're being treated like a child. They're exhausted because they feel like that they're responsible. They're stressed out. They're disconnected from you because you maybe not giving them the attention that you want because you're hyper-focusing playing video games. And they become exhausted and they feel the same way, unwanted and unloved. And then what happens is things kind of get bad, right? And so part of my experience with therapy is how to work on my relationship and make sure that I am aware of those things so that I can work on them. And so one of the books that that has been really good for me was ADHD and Us. It's a couple's guide to loving and living with adult ADHD. It's a great book. Anita Robertson, she's out of Texas, wrote this book. And it's great because it's not very technical. It's very straightforward. And then it has some great exercises in the back that you can do and throughout it. So it's a great book to use because it gives you an opportunity to work with your spouse. As I was prepping this, I was practicing with my sister, and I was telling her, and she was like, well, I've learned some stuff today about this. Even though she has ADHD, and with her spouse, they went on a trip, took their grandkids to the Grand Canyon, to the Niagara Falls, and they took all 5 of their grandkids. And the last night on their way back, she's like, I cannot do this anymore. She was exhausted, and her husband was exhausted, and everything, and her ADHD was through it, and she got very emotionally driven, and she's like, we're going home tonight. If we have to drive home tonight, we're driving home tonight. I can't do this anymore. They drove home through the night, and then she looks back on it, and she's like, it's probably because of my ADHD really kicking in and really creating a very emotionally driven response to something that I probably could have just, if I could just calm down and relaxed, I would have been okay. So very important. So when we look at our relationships and those kind of things, our work relationships and those kind of things, I never use ADHD as my excuse. So if I forget to do something at work, I miss a deadline, I don't respond to an email, I don't show up for a meeting, I apologize, I work through it with them, but one thing that I think is very important is that I don't say, I'm sorry, I have ADHD, because I don't want to put that out front. I don't think that's necessary. If it becomes a habitual problem where maybe I've missed 3 or 4 meetings, I may sit down with that person, especially if they become frustrated with me, and say to them, hey, I don't know if you know much about me, but I'm very open about it now, and I'll tell them about my ADHD and work through it. But one of the things that's very challenging around ADHD is ADHD and other medical conditions. Specifically like behavioral health conditions. So when you start thinking about diabetes, what also do we think about? Kidney disease, eye issues, those kind of things, right? So there's things that kind of go hand in hand. It's the same thing with our brain. So when we look at psychiatric comorbidities, those things include like bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, and personality disorders. Here's the thing. If you have been diagnosed with depression and they put you on a certain type of antidepressant, it actually can make your ADHD worse. Okay? So they have to really work together and figure out what works and doesn't work when there's comorbidities. And what you want to do is you want to optimally manage both of them at the same time. And that can be a challenge. For me, I have anxiety disorder. Had it my entire life. It is just, I thought it was just me. And so, one of the things that happens to me is I cycle my anxiety and my ADHD symptoms. So I get very anxious about something. I'll forget things. I'll become more emotionally driven. I'll become impulsive. I'll forget to do things that I need to do. Those kind of things. When I do that, that makes me anxious, right? Yeah, I forgot to do something. I forgot to go to that meeting, and now my boss is calling me. Now I'm more anxious. Well, so you have to figure out how to break those cycles and those kind of things, and that's where therapy can be very beneficial to somebody. So as an injury prevention person, I can't come up here and not talk about injuries that are related to ADHD. And so persons with ADHD have a higher risk of injury than persons that don't have ADHD. Because you think about it from the perspective of risky behaviors, distractions, and sleep disturbance, right? And so some great research was done and published in 2021 around this. And what they found was the trends when you looked at ADHD and injuries with youth, younger school-age kids, it was burns, fractures, and head injuries. So you think about what they would be doing that would cause those things, like riding on their bicycles and those kind of things, or touching the stovetop or whatever it may be. Young adults is traffic and driving related injuries. I got my driver's license when I was 15. When I turned 16, I could drive on my own. My parents would let me drive on my own. Within 12 months, I had 3 car crashes. All of them were the same. I rammed into the back of other cars because I wasn't paying attention, and I got like 4 speeding tickets. I was like 2 points from like, you're not going to drive for a year. And my mom told me, she's like, I'm not paying this car insurance. You're going to have to figure it out. And so I had to get a little part-time job and pay for my car insurance if I wanted to drive. And but that I can see where that's related. And you see this picture, and a lot of times people with ADHD will do things, and it's not intentional. We're not doing it to be malice or punitive or anything like that. But think about, she's on the phone with her friend. She's very excited. She's hyper-focused on that conversation. She jumps in her car. She doesn't put her seatbelt on. She drives out of the parking lot. She has a car crash. Hurts her really bad. It can happen. As a person that works in injury prevention, I know the importance of wearing your seatbelt. And as a nurse that's worked in trauma, I know the importance of it. I can tell you, I jump in that car sometimes, and the thing that reminds me is that ding, 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 because it'll, it makes you, bugs you to death. And so I'll put the seatbelt on. One time we went with a group horseback riding. Well, as a person has lived around horses my entire life, I've never worn a helmet. We just didn't do that when I was growing up. And then when I moved here and took this job, we use equestrian helmets all the time in our work. And we were up in the mountains riding with some friends, and about halfway through, and I thought, sent some pictures to some friends at work, and they're like, you're not wearing a helmet? And I thought, nope, I'm not. And I was like, well, I hope I don't fall off. But so it happens. And then all adults in the workplace, right? So where you are most of your day. But what they have found is medications to treat ADHD does decrease the risk across the lifespan. So from, being a young child all the way up until as an older adult. And persons with ADHD and mental disorder comorbidities, like we were talking about with like anxiety and bipolar and depression, further increases your risk of injuries and accidents. One of the things we also see is people that have these comorbidities typically have longer hospital stays, and frequently they don't have the support in place that many other people would have. And so it's a longer recovery for them. So it's just a thing that reminded me as I was doing the research to put this together was to make sure when I'm out working with kiddos and those kind of things that I recognize that some of them in the room may have ADHD, and if I lose their attention, they're losing the message, right? And so how I can keep them engaged is very important. So a couple of recommendations that I have. It's so important to get to know somebody. If you know somebody that has ADHD and they're willing to talk about it, talk to them about it. I'm happy to share about mine. People at work come to me sometimes. I had a coworker, she said, I think my son has ADHD. I said, you want to talk about it? She said, sure. So we started talking about it, and it sounded that way, and so I made a recommendation to who go see, and he is being treated, and he's doing really well. And so, really engage them, really ask questions if they're willing to be open and talk about it. A lot of times when people have ADHD, they don't know what your perspective is, so they may not share with you, right? Or they may not tell you. Engage with compassion. You may not understand it, but look at it, try to look through their lens and see where they're coming from. One of the things that I can't encourage you more, especially with young adults and things, is leverage their gifts and talents because of that reward system. So if you give them things that they love to do, they will be so engaged way more than things that are not there. So for me and the type of work I do, I love being around people and creating new projects and programs and those kind of things. Please do not give me Excel spreadsheets and all those kind of things because there's not engaging to me, and I will stare at it for an hour and then I will just click away because it's gone now. So leverage their gifts and talents, and where they are. Set realistic goals and boundaries. One of the things that I had a therapist tell me one time is, you have ADHD, but it's not an excuse. and I don't let it be an excuse for me. And so if I like to have boundaries and goals, right? I think they're very important. And so don't always, if your spouse forgets to do something, hold them accountable, right? It's important. Or if your child or a friend or what have you, and set those boundaries. I think it's important, because what happens when you don't do that is then you've created, you're enabling them to just continue to do it over and over. And I have coworkers that don't set boundaries with me, and I know they don't. And so I'm like, if I don't get that today, they won't be too upset about that. And then I'll forget about it, and then I don't do it. Routines are the most important thing for somebody with ADHD. Having things visible, or where they can see it or hear it or experience it, they will remember to do it. One of the things when I travel is remember to take my medications. And so I put them in 4 different places. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got to take my medicine this morning. Limit distractions. Oh man, they gave me an office at the hospital. It was basically a closet. I had no window. I had no nothing outside, nothing to give me any kind of stimulation. And it was a great environment. But then they said, Robert, we have this awesome office for you. You're going to have a window, and you're going to see out into the courtyard. There's rabbits and squirrels out there. And I'll be honest with you, those little bunnies, I will look at them for an hour and then be like, I have just spent an hour. Or I'll get distracted. I've done these types of presentations before where there's something in the background that has been distracting to me, and I can't even concentrate, because that's what I'm going to hyper-focus on, So limiting distractions is the best thing. And then one of the things that, with ADHD, and if you do get anxious and things are really challenging for a person, and they need to de-escalate and calm down and relax, a great thing is prayer and music. So, especially for me to focus through prayer is a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And then music. Sometimes I just need to put on a little music. Sometimes I need to get the energy out, so I'll put on the music and I'll just get the energy out, right? And if I'm cleaning, that's one thing I don't like to do. I don't like to clean. I don't know. Many people do, but cleaning is like a thing for me. I'll find every excuse not to do it. But if I put music on and I focus on the music while I'm cleaning, I can get way more done. So, music's a great way to center yourself. Those kind of things. So I have about a few minutes left, and I if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy. I'm an open book. I don't mind answering things. Okay.
Questions?
I have a son that I feel, he said he was diagnosed as being ADHD. And we've always said that he is very into himself and doesn't care as much about others. Do you think that is also a symptom?
So from the inattentive aspect of ADHD, and I'll talk about it from that perspective. So I don't know your son and those kind of things, so I can't talk from that perspective. But the lack of focus and the lack of attention can communicate to some people that they don't care. So a perfect example for me is if I'm in a meeting and I catch myself doing this, if it's something that's not really engaging to me, I could care. I could care. I don't care. And so I don't focus. And you'll see me over there, and all of a sudden I've got my phone and I'm texting people. And then I realize, oh, I'm not paying attention. And I can tell that other people, it kind of probably hurts their feelings, or it may communicate that I'm not caring. The whole time, usually, I'm listening, and I'm getting the major aspects of it. But I've had friends that have told me that their families have told them, because they've had ADHD, that they just don't care, because they don't show up to birthday parties, or, oh, I'll help. One of the things that I'm notorious for is, oh yeah, I'll put in $10 to buy that gift, and I never give them the $10 because I forget. And it can be communicated in that way. Yeah.
We have a question here.
Are the symptoms the same for girls and boys?
So, no. Yes and no. They're the same, but I think from what I read and from the research that I have found is with girls, a lot of times with boys, it can be a little bit more emotionally driven, a little bit more of the distraction because of all the things that's going around them. Where I think with some girls, from what I was reading, it's more about staying on task and getting stressed out more and going down that anxiety-driven perspective. But they're the same. It's just how the symptoms. So basically, it's in you, and it's how you respond to the external world, right? So a perfect example is if I walked up to somebody and I gave them a $20 bill. They may be very excited, right? And they say, "Oh, thank you, that's really nice of you, I appreciate that." I could go up to another person and give them a $20 bill, and I was like, "That's all you're gonna give me?" Or they could say, "Why are you giving me that?" So it's how you respond to the external world. And so I think there probably is some, but I'm not sure exactly. That would be a great research project, so you probably just gave me an idea.
Okay, when I was looking at the comorbidities, I was looking to see the Asperger's now, the autism spectrum disorder. How do you distinguish?
So that's important. So I didn't use some of the terminology that sometimes I use. So there is neurotypical, which is the typical person in the world, on how they respond to the external world, socially, spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And then there's the neurodiverse world, right? And so ADHD, autism, Asperger's, all of those things fall into there. And it's around the chemicals that are floating in our brains. A lot of people, a perfect example of this, when you think about a concussion, a head concussion, you don't have to hit your head to have a concussion. A lot of people don't realize that. It's a chemical change in your brain is what a concussion is. It is not the hitting of the brain or the tissue. What it is the movement of it and the sheer pulling that releases certain chemicals that are supposed to stay in the cells, and they get outside the cells and they cause problems. And so it's the chemicals that are inside there that is related to all of these neurodiverse conditions. Perfect example of a concussion. We have a sports medicine doc. He goes out and teaches with me. He always says, you don't have to hit your head to get a concussion. And he's like, if you play soccer and you fall on your butt, you can send enough energy up your back and into your head to give you a concussion. You never hit your head. And so, and then he says some more things, but it's not appropriate for church. And I'm always like, don't say that. But, but he loves to do that. But yeah, it's all around the chemicals in our brains. Yep.
Any more questions?
You mentioned the comorbidity characteristic. Are they just characteristics of the ADHD, or are they separate entirely?
So think about like heart disease, right? And so think about somebody has a heart attack, and they may have diabetes as well. And so because of whatever could have been, and it could be lifestyle, it could be genetics, it could be those kind of things. While it's two different systems or two different conditions, they are related. And so when you think about comorbidities, it's like for behavioral health issues, a lot of those are like, they go hand in hand, and they either pair or they compete with each other. And so it's kind of a hard way to explain it, but you have to treat both of them, and you also have to rule out other things. So if somebody comes in and they're like, yeah, I've had a hard time focusing for the last couple of weeks. I'm stressed out, I lost my job, I'm forgetting to pay my bills, I think I have ADHD. No, you may not have ADHD, you may have an anxiety disorder, right? And it could be anxiety that's triggering these things. And so we need to treat the anxiety, and then those ADHD type symptoms go away, right? What happens sometimes for some people is they may have an ADHD diagnosis and a bipolar disorder at the same time. And it's a little bit more prevalent. If you have one behavioral health disorder, you're more likely to have another one. And for me, it's ADHD and anxiety. And so you can't treat just one, you have to treat both of them for it to be optimal. So if you treat just one and you don't treat the other, it can actually make the other one worse. But they also can compete with each other. Like I was talking about earlier, the anxiety. If my anxiety gets out of control, my ADHD symptoms, go up. So I know if I can control one and work on one, it's going to help the other one.
Well, thank you, Robert. Wasn't that wonderful?
Thank you. And we finished on time. It's so important. I was like, I want to make sure I finish on time. We finished right on time.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank
Can we
you.
be friends forever?
Of course.
Okay, great.
Thank you.